Hello, everyone, and please accept our apologies for the technical problems, and thank you so much for being so patient with us and waiting for the program to start. And thanks again for joining us for today's webinar. I want to start by first acknowledging the land on which UHN operates. There has been a UHN hospital on this land since 1829. Long before that, Indigenous people were its stewards. They, as the descendants, and we at UHN do now, learned, shared knowledge, and healed each other. The current COVID crisis means that many of us are working from home, and that could be anywhere in the province. Ontario is covered by 46 territorial treaties and agreements with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Regardless of where we sit today, we owe much to the people that have called this land home. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work here. We remember and honor the legacy of the peoples who have been here before us and all who work to make the promise and the challenges of truth and reconciliation real. I would like to invite you all to join me in taking a moment to reflect on the land that you are on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Kathy Craven. I am one of the senior scientists at the KITE Research Institute. And we are here today to celebrate part of the International Day for People Living with Disabilities. As many of you know, 1 in 2 Ontarians will have a disability at some point in their lifetime, either due to injury, illness, or as a consequence of aging. And we wanted to take some time today to really challenge some of the myths, meaning widely held but false beliefs or ideas about living with disability. I could have the next slide, please. I am fortunate to have with me Lubna Aslam and Randy Upper as co-presenters for your Mythbusters. I know many of you may be familiar with the Discovery Channel Mythbusters show, where they take common scientific myths and try to explore whether they are valid or not. And we wanted to take some time today to review some of the social myths that are around us related to people living with disability. If you could go to the next slide, please. And again, the next slide, if that's okay. So here are your Mythbusters for this afternoon. Go back, please, December 3rd, 2020. So Lubna, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Randy?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Lubna Aslam. I manage the peer program at Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. It is a provincial program, and along with that, I'm also a daughter, sister, wife, and a very proud mother of two. I've lived with my spinal cord injury for 18 years now, and thank you for having me today. On to you, Randy.
Okay. Hi, my name is Randy Upper. Very happy to be here. I have a bit of an unstable connection. For those that know me, I'm talking about my computer. I currently work as a clinical research associate with Lawson Research. I have a master's degree in social work, a registered social worker, and yeah, done a lot of traveling, played a lot of sports, and the biggest accomplishment I see is raising my lovely now 22-year-old daughter. So, and I've been living with spinal cord injury for 32 years now. So that's me.
Thanks, Randy. My name is Kathy Craven. As I said, I'm a senior scientist here at the Kite Research Institute. I'm also the medical director of the spinal cord rehab program. I am a mother of a child with a disability. I am the sister of an individual with disability, and I am the daughter of someone with a disability. And I have spent the bulk of my career providing care and trying to create improvements in health services for people living with disability. So without further ado, I'd like to start talking about our first myth. So if we could have the next slide, let's talk about myth number 1. And Randy said he's having a little connection problems. I'm unglued and connecting. So myth number 1, people in a wheelchair or using a gait aid also have a cognitive impairment. And Randy, would you like to speak to that first?
Sure. I mean, it's ever so evident when I'm out in the public with my wife. When I ask a question, for example, people will automatically turn to her and answer. It happens all the time. And the absolute shock that some people have when they find out about my educational background and the fact that I work, it is a myth that is very prevalent. And there is this, and I even found when having to redo my driver's license, I argued the fact that I had to go back and redo the written portion of my driver's test, when I argued the fact that my injury was physical. There was absolutely no record of things happening cognitively, but there's this automatic assumption that there must be some kind of cognitive impairment if you're using some kind of aid. So yeah, I experience this a lot. We'll discuss whether or not it's accurate after we hear from Lubna and what her experience has been with that.
Yeah, I think it is not very uncommon as a person who, is out and about, and, usually I'm with a group of friends, and even when people talk to my husband and ask him, what would I like to order at the restaurant? I am, firstly, it's difficult for me to ever get a word in if I am the speaking person, but to have that assumption made that he speaks for me or my sister can speak for me about, what I would like to eat at a restaurant, how I would like to go about doing things, like speak to me, don't make assumptions about me. That is something that I'd like to say to people. And it is not appropriate to treat someone like you are your disability. I think that is what really irritates me about this myth, is that you are just reduced to a disability rather than being seen as a person who has a voice. Because you have a disability, it is assumed that you have other challenges or other, basically equating disability with inability is the most irritating part about having to, go through days of living with this myth.
Thanks, Lubna. So treat each person as an individual. Let's talk about myth number 2. the social boundaries for people with disability are different than for the general population. Lubna, I thought you might want to talk about some of your experiences.
Yes, I think usually as someone who lives with a disability, I constantly am subjected to like some inappropriate social questioning. For example, what happened to you? Inappropriate touching. People will assume they can touch my wheelchair without asking me for permission. My wheelchair is an extension of me as a person, so I do not appreciate someone touching my wheelchair without asking my permission first. And inappropriate sympathy. It can be something as simple as a click, like, oh, or I'm sorry for you, or it could be something like pat on my head. And yes, I'm not kidding. People have patted me on the head for, I don't know, being able to get into an elevator or something like that. So it plays out in every day in ways that belittle who you are, because people assume they can ask you something as personal as, like, we don't go to someone who's not using a wheelchair and ask them a question like, what happened to you, right? So why would you ask someone who's using a wheelchair?
All right, thanks, Lubna. I think that the normal social boundaries apply to everyone, whether they have normal or exceptional abilities or a disability. Let's think about myth number 3, and Randy, I'm coming to you. People with disability are not desirable and are asexual.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a very hot kind of topic for me, is the whole area of sexuality and disability. It's nice to see the strides that certain programs like, the education program at Lyndhurst and at other inpatient facilities, and how they are, now really focusing on sexuality as a primary issue for people after a spinal cord injury. Because there really is this sense out there that as soon as you've got a chair underneath you, you're less attractive. And I mean, and this goes for some of the social myths that are out there, and then some of those myths that people hold for themselves when they're first in a chair as well, that I'm no longer attractive. How can I possibly get anybody to be interested in me? I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Grab hold of the first person that pays any attention to me. All of these things really go through your head because of some of the myths that you develop yourself when you're out in because they are so prevalent in our society. And it is furthest from the truth. I mean, just sit down with a group of people who have spinal cord injuries, in my experience, and ultimately the issue of sex and some kind of sexuality type issue comes up, or discussion comes up, because everything is the desire, the libido, the want to be connected with somebody else. All of those things are still there, yet they're negated. And that's, I don't know. Basically, that's, been my experience with it. And when you say about boundaries, there's an overlap that I found a lot in between boundaries and the asexual part, because I have had so many total strangers walk up to me and ask me if I can still have sex. It's incredible. Like, I mean, I'm almost 6 feet tall and weigh over 200 pounds. So if I was standing, would somebody come up and ask me that question? Not likely,
Yeah, I just want to add, like, the fact is that sometimes some of these myths, they have real life implications, like, an assumption is made about your libido, about, your ability to satisfy a partner, and then you sometimes the society seems to tell you that, you must accept pity dates, and if this is a partner that you don't want to accept, it's like, hey, you don't have as many choices as people who do not have a disability. It's like the underlying theme, which does minimize who you are as a person.
Oh, and added to that, the amount of times that my wife has been told, "Oh, you're such an angel," or "You're such a good person," because you've settled with someone sitting in a wheelchair. It's just absurd, but it happens, and it's crazy.
Yeah. And then, people don't discuss contraception and other related issues too. When people make that assumption of based on your disability about what your sexual activity is like, that we should all have equal access to information, education, and resources. I need to know about contraception, conception, education about my sexual health is important to me, and I'm sure it is important to everyone who has a disability.
Okay, thanks, Lubna and Randy, for sharing. I know that is a real hot button myth that we have, I think, fully debunked there. Let's talk about, if we could, myth number 4. People with disabilities should not have children. And I wonder, Lubna, would you like to start, and then we'll talk to Randy?
Sure. I am a mother, a very proud mother of 2 teenagers, and it's not uncommon that I would be out shopping and someone will say something like, "Oh, aren't you mama's little helpers?" They really other things, amongst other things, like it seems like people assume that they are in the role of caretaking, and I am in the role role of caregiving, and I'm in the role of receiving care, and which is nothing could be further than the truth. And I think there are also people who assume that parenting requires so much of you that if you have a disability, that's what's going to consume you, and then you cannot give yourself, or you cannot take on the role of parenting. But in my personal opinion, nothing could be further than truth. If I wanted to adopt more, I'm sure that people will think that, oh, she has a disability and she has 2 kids. Does she really want to adopt more? And I know there are misinformed decisions around access to abortions, access to other services that one might need. I'm sure Randy would like to add his details about what it might feel like. I worried too about what if we were ever to have a custody hearing about children, would my disability play into that? And that is a very real fear that I'm sure many other people have. I mean, that is unfortunate that your disability can have that impact on all aspects of your life, including parenting.
Yeah, Randy, I wonder if you share some of your experiences as a single parent.
Yeah, and actually that's the issue of whether or not in terms of a custody battle when you separate. I was or my daughter was 3 when her mother and I separated and subsequently divorced. And that was a big fear that I had, because it was actually threatened to me that, if I want to get custody, I'll get custody because I'll just use the fact that you're in a chair. And I mean, I had a lot of people wonder, because of my level of injury and not having the ability, I don't know, my core, so to lean over and sit, people like, how are you going to pick her up if she's hurt? How are you going to do this if there's an issue? I mean, you adapt. There are ways to adapt. And despite the fact that I was her primary giver from the time that she was born, I had people very close to me questioning whether or not I would have the ability to raise her on my own. And to the point where I had experiences being at a local mall where I had a security guard follow me around and then followed me right out to when I got my daughter into the van, and then he turned around and left. And it happened on a number of occasions. It's just crazy. And when Lubna said too about the adoption, had difficulties with the conception part of things when I was with my daughter's mom. And the adoption agent that we went to outright said that because who the child goes to is up to the birth mother, it's not likely that we would be able to get an adoption successfully. And this came right from the agent that was supposed to be helping us. So yeah, it's and again the shock. Oh, she's yours? Absolutely, she's mine. You know. So yeah, it's a big one. It really is.
Thank you both for sharing your personal stories. I know been a long journey, and that's a really important myth to have debunked. Can we move on and talk a little bit about myth number 5? If you have a disability, you are not a happy person, or you have a poor quality of life. Wonder, Lubna, if you can share your experience with some of these assumptions.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. I don't think being happy should feel like a rebellion, right? I'm just, we all have different levels of emotional bounds, and I think on most days I would call myself a happier person than the other person. My disability doesn't impact my emotions to the level that I'm just like, that's all I'm thinking of all day. That doesn't happen. It's not like my disability makes me a pathetic person to be just completely consumed, unable to control my emotions and stuff like that. So this has happened quite often, and I don't think me being happy should ever feel like it's an act of rebellion.
Certainly after a disability, people will have changes in their health, but sometimes they report even improvements in their quality of life or changes in the nature of their relationships. I don't know, Randy, if you'd like to speak to that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is, particularly if it's an acquired disability, there is a period of grieving. There is a period where you go through some depression. You go through times when you feel that you are in this pit that you can't get out of. I mean, there is that process at the beginning, and it really depends on what people do with that and how they manage to cope, what kind of supports they have around them, all those types of things. And that it's not necessarily just the assumption is that it's the disability is what makes you have a poor quality of life, as opposed as the way that you've learned to cope with the disability that gives you a poor quality of life. I know for myself, I was heading down a pretty disastrous path at the point when I had my accident. And I really believe that having the accident afforded me way more opportunities in life than what I would have gotten otherwise. And the vast majority of people that I tell this to question it at some point, to some degree. That, how could that possibly be? You're paralyzed now. But I truly believe you make your happiness, and that it's not a given. So sure, some people have a poor quality of life and are not very happy after their disability, but it's not generalized. I mean, it's just not.
Thank you for that.
I've gone all fuzzy.
I wonder if we can move on to myth number 6. People in wheelchairs are always in need of help. Unsolicited help is always welcome. I wonder, Randy and Lubna, if you can talk about some of your experiences where help has felt a little bit like assault, and to share some of those experiences for people on the line to help debunk this myth that people in wheelchairs are always in need of help.
Yeah, it's great. I'm grateful. I'm happy that you brought up the point where it feels like assault, because again, there's some overlap between this myth and some of the other ones regarding boundaries and the fact that you've got a cognitive impairment as well as physical disability when you're in a chair, because it's as if when you start talking, people don't hear you, and no really doesn't mean no. And I've had the worst experience that I had with this was in the winter I was going across the street and I was popping wheelies over the ruts of snow that were in the middle of the road. And some guy came up behind me and grabbed the back of my chair and just started pushing. And the whole time across the street, I was saying to him, no, stop. No, you're going to dump me out of my chair. Stop. Well, of course, once we got to where the curb was, He didn't pop up my front wheels or anything. I hit and I ended up face first on the sidewalk. I got up, got back in my chair, told this person what I thought about the help, and he turned around and turned it around on me and started calling me names and saying, he was just trying to help. So it was terrible. I mean, fortunately, I didn't end up hurt, but yeah, there's. I think the general rule is always assume a person's capable of doing something until they ask for help, because it accumulates. Like even with people insisting on opening doors, or it just builds up. That in terms of your feelings about yourself, and in terms of people always wanting to do that, it's insulting. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not bitter. When I need help, I'll ask for it. It's great to have it. But a lot of times it's, yeah. And again, I think it's really connected to the boundary issue. Is that, as Ludna said, wheelchair is extension of who I am. So when people are touching that, it's no different than touching any other part of my body. So, and I really found when I had my daughter, there was a lot of examples of this, of people coming up and actually thinking that I needed help picking her up to put her, for example, in the vehicle, and they would come over and grab my child and try to pick them up. And then when I would turn around and tell them that this is something that I don't appreciate, I've got it under control, it turned around as if I was the one with the chip on my shoulder. So I find that, I don't know, how are your experiences, Ludna?
Yeah, I have very similar experiences to echo, especially I think the visuals of having, when you are crossing a road and you see someone who's crossing a road and has like two children holding on to her push bars on her wheelchair. I know what it looks like. I know the visual representation, what it probably wants you to do. You probably are like, oh, that family needs my help. But if I need help, I will ask you for help. I will make eye contact. I will smile, and I will say, "Excuse me, can you grab me something that is kept on a shelf that I cannot reach?" Right? But when my children are young, I am also stressed about crossing the road. I want to make sure that I cross the road before the timer goes off on me and stuff like that. I really feel that strangers coming, trying to, hold my children's hands or touch my wheelchair or stop them for them to assume that my children are pushing me across rather than understanding that they're holding on to my push bars, because that is the equivalent of holding my hands while they cross the road, are some of the things that I know as a lived experience. I understand. I don't know if people understand that on their end. If I need help, please be assured I will ask you for help. I will make eye contact. I will flag you down and I will request for help. But if I'm not asking for help, please assume that I can get this done myself, no matter how difficult the visuals are.
Thanks for sharing, Ludna. I'd like to move on to myth number 7, which is rather timely. COVID does not really change the life or behaviors of people with disability. And I thought we could talk about what is true and what is not true about myth number 7.
Something that I was talking about yesterday with an individual was regarding such things as attendant care and stuff like that. COVID, I think, has really changed the life of people with disabilities when it comes to their attendant care. I think it also extends to how it's really has the potential for really affecting, in particular, intimate relationships between people during COVID, because I know a lot of, again, through this conversation, a lot of people have chosen to not have attendants come into their home because just to make their bubble smaller, and as a result, lean more on their partner to help with their daily care. And not only that, but there also seems to be this trend when people are kind of discharged from the hospital and sent home, that their partner is automatically considered to be a support person. And again, this is just from conversations that I've had with people that work in various capacities within the hospital system. And that's hard. I mean, that's really gonna put strain on relationships, on people with their partners. So in that way, I can see how COVID has really changed the life and behaviors of people living with disabilities.
Yeah,
I think
I can attest to that lots of people are concerned about, for those who are absolutely reliant on attendance, that they're fearful about, will their attendants come, and if they come, are they people who are appropriately trained?
right.
Which is also contributing to the strain on families when people are ill or don't show up for work. It creates a lot of challenges for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. During COVID, we clean high-touch areas. What does that mean for someone with a disability or who's using a wheelchair?
Well, when I come back home after having, a little wheel around my neighborhood, I take, because there is a lack of wipes, I wipe down, I take Clorox solutions and wipe down my entire wheels, any area that I may not have realized may have touched, like my foot plates, anything that I know that my children are going to touch the push handles. Even if no one has touched them, I feel like I feel the need to clean them so that no one else is touching them. It has taken, sanitization to a whole new level for most of us, and it is not easy if you can't reach all parts of your wheelchair, if you can't touch, if you can't do it yourself. Going outside almost always means that you would need someone upon return who's able to help you with cleaning your own wheelchair. So as a result, most of us feel that even during summers, we've tried to stay indoors, tried to stay as requiring as lesser services as possible from ourselves and from our family members. So it has been quite a year when it comes to sanitization.
I
And
think
what's the transportation during COVID if you need wheelchair accessible transit?
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to comment to is on the socialization part of things. I mean, again, tend to be a population that is more isolated than the general population with people that don't live with disabilities. But add to that COVID and just the risks that are out there regarding taking something like a Wheel-Trans bus or a cab where people have been, and because we have so many more contact surfaces to the ground and all that kind of stuff, like we've been said, having to really sanitize everything, there's just that much more risk at every time you go out. So I think it's really had a major impact on socialization and social behaviors for people. Again, because of wanting to minimize the risk. And I think I heard that although it has been better, that people with spinal cord injuries or with disabilities, the death rate or the risk is a certain percentage higher than the general population. So, and if you do contract it, so yeah, I think it's affected it that way too.
Yeah, Randy, and the other thing that I wanted to point out that's different about people with disability tend to have a smaller social network than the able-bodied population, but their bonds with the people in that network are much tighter, so that if your attendant is not available, if you're not able to travel to your medical appointment, and those people are part of your social network, that can be fairly isolating for people with disability.
Yeah.
So just to think about, when we're thinking about research or implementation, that these issues are quite challenging for some people, and having attendants that are willing to come to the home or travel with people to appointments has been challenging for some people. I wondered if we could talk about myth number 8. If we go to the next slide, that COVID has been beneficial for people with disability. And Lubna, I wondered about your perspective on employment and disability and how this may have changed during COVID.
Yes, okay. One of the things that I really feel strongly about is that when usually if I spoke about my needs for accessibility, they would get categorized into special needs, and that gives like a little connotation as privilege, like as if I'm asking for something that normal population would not ask for. So usually, if you are someone who is unemployed and you would ask for flexibility to work from home or work flex hours. Before COVID, when we were all forced to work from home, employers would possibly think of it as a special request. But it is not really a special request. Now that we've all been forced to work from home and experience what it is like, we all know that we can be equally productive, we can be equally efficient, and already we know that a lot of people with disabilities, they're really good as problem solvers, they're really good, like they use their skills to manage their time quite effectively. So what was considered to be a special request is no longer hopefully looked upon as a special accommodation that is being requested from an employer. And I think this helps us to bridge some of those gaps in understanding. It gives us all a chance to work well, work hard, and work together.
Yeah, I've heard from many patients that they found that now that everyone's working from home, that some of the work from home misnomers are no longer exist. And a lot of people have talked about the advantages of some of the delivery services that are in place and how we might, now grocery stores will allow you to just drive up and pick up your groceries or to pick up food. And I hope some of these services will exist beyond COVID for people with disability, because they've leveled the playing field in a lot of ways. I want to comment on other services that have been available that weren't normally.
So 1 in 7 Ontarians currently identified as having a disability, and I think that is going to change as the baby boomer population is going to age, and a lot of disability is going to be possibly be brought upon because of an aging population. And I think those numbers are going to be 1 in 5 individuals having a disability. So I think what we need to think about is, I think collectively we have agreed that going back to what the old normal was is not really a good solution. We need to go back to things with this improved understanding of what we have, and accessibility, improvement in services that we have seen right now there's a huge reason for it to continue. I think earlier when I used to try to tell people that instead of helping me develop a wheelchair that climbs stairs, I would much rather people invest more time in understanding how easy it is for everyone to use ramps, and let's focus on finding solutions that work for everyone, just not for some of us. I think people will get back to it with a better understanding now that we've lived through a pandemic. And I'm going to let Andy speak now. I think I've spoken too much.
No, I think there have been a lot of services that have come out that are now with COVID more normalized. I mean, there's, as you mentioned with groceries, pharmacy. I'm so happy that I don't have to run out to the pharmacy. Another great thing too is phone call doctor's appointments, which are great for, I think it's great because I normally travel 2 hours to get to my doctor's appointment. So now it's just a phone call. And it's also going to very much benefit individuals with disabilities that don't live in city centers, that live, far reaches and that travel up to 12 hours to get in to see, a specialist doctor. That now a lot of that can be done either by phone or, by video. All of our cameras take pictures. I think that is awesome. It's been a very positive change.
I think for the people going home from rehab too, we've also seen that when we can actually see them in their homes, we can come up with even greater and better recommendations. So that's been an interesting advantage during COVID. I wonder if we could go on to myth number 9 and talk about people living with disability are willing research guinea pigs and willing to accept risk.
Well, I don't think that, I don't think it's any different than a, able-bodied population. I mean, some people are going to be interested in the research and some aren't. But there is that assumption that, well, don't you want to help out, your group? Don't you want to be there to, to help better things for other people with disabilities or spinal cord injury or whatever? And for some people, it's too much. I mean, they live with their disability and they go through life having to deal with things that are associated with a disability. And that a lot of times they don't want to be reminded of that. And I know, as doing research myself and talking to potential participants and stuff, there are just some people that will say, I don't want my entire 24/7 life focused on looking at disability and picking it apart and looking at, they just don't want that. Whereas there are other people who are very willing to do it. So I don't think you should make an assumption that it's any different than, people that don't have disabilities. That, it's the same.
Yeah, I wonder, Randy or Lubna, if you guys could share some of the logistical issues about living with a disability and coming to a research appointment or a research follow-up visit. When you say, hey, I can't be there till noon. And people say, well, oh, can't you come earlier? Couldn't you just be here at 9 a.m.? Could you share some of the things that are going on in the background that contribute to that logistical dilemma for people with disabilities?
Well, you take this one, Lubna, because I know you take paratransit, right?
I do take wheel transit every day.
So you talk about that, because I'm fortunate enough I drive, so.
Yeah. I take wheel trans every day, and wheel trans is what I call a very inconvenient convenience, as in I can depend on it from getting me from point A to point B, but can I rely on it to get me there on time? Not always. So what I feel is to understand that putting things in the terms of time and place for, just using those two as your big perspective lenses to understand what is going to happen. So I do get to work fairly early. I travel about 20 kilometers every day in the morning to get to my place of work, which is UHN at Sutherland Drive. But for me to get there at 8 a.m., I leave my home between 6:50 and 7 a.m. And that is because I wake up and I do not require attendance services in the morning to help me get dressed, to help me get the day started. I do have to prepare lunches for my children and have their breakfast ready before I leave. And the reason I leave at 6:50 in the morning to just cover 20 kilometers of journey into Lyndhurst Center is because I use wheel trans, and it doesn't take me from point A to point B. I have to stop along the way and have multiple drop-ons and drop-offs. It is a ride-share system, and we, have to respect the system for what it is able to deliver, and that requires a lot of discipline. And if I wake up in the morning and if it is not experience digestive distress, or I couldn't sleep, or because of a headache, my day goes in for a toss, because now I don't have reliable transport. I don't know if they will be able to offer an alternate time for me, an alternate time that works for me. I think I can very safely say they can never give me an alternate time that works for me. So this is something that we need to take back. Also, I'm someone who's almost always ready to help out in research, because I do acknowledge that my life is infinitely better now because of all the improvements in healthcare systems, and research plays a huge part into it. But then again, was I this willing when my children who are 18 months apart were toddlers and going to kindergarten? No, not really, because I do have other aspects of my life that take higher priority. So sometimes research will lose out to where other things are on my priority list. But yes, it is not lost upon any of us that research is an important fact, and we do our best, but sometimes our best doesn't go far enough. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Lubna. I think what I wanted to raise awareness about is there are some people who are dependent on attendance to get out of bed or to get a shower, to get dressed in the morning, to complete their toileting. And some people require, 2 hours to get up and get going in the morning. So sometimes when they say, I'm happy to participate in research, but I can only come to an afternoon appointment, they really mean I can only come to an afternoon appointment because their attendant might not arrive at their home till 8:30 in the morning. Then they have 2-hour routine before they're ready to go. They can't leave their house till 10:30, so they really can't get there till noon. So when people are talking about what they can and can't do with disability, I do think it is important for researchers to listen and to try to plan around their schedules, because they won't necessarily say why. They may not share with you as the research team why that time frame isn't good for them, but they often have very good logistical concerns or constraints that they want to make people aware of.
Yeah, spontaneity is sometimes hard.
Spontaneity is challenging. I agree.
And we all have unique
Absolutely.
needs. We all,
Yeah.
we all know. If you are taking care of an aging parent, you know that your time and your considerations will take some shuffling around. So just remember, just like it is for you, it is for all of us.
So we've talked a lot today about those with visible disabilities, and we have not talked about those with invisible disabilities. But I think the strategy and the take-home messages are the same for both groups. Ask, do not assume when we're thinking about offering help. People, if someone with a disability does ask you for help, I think it's really important to stop and listen and try to assist them if you can. Disability does not change who you are. And I think it's really important as researchers that we see the individuals in front of us with unique needs and common rights as human beings. And I think there's a really unique opportunity for us to preserve the shifts in services and systems that has happened during COVID to sustain them after COVID. In the next slide, there are some resources for people who are interested in, sorry, do you go one more, Margaret? Keep going. One more. There's some resources for people who are interested in trying to think about effective diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And this was really designed for employers, for employees. But I think some of the recommendations in this article could really be applied if you substituted employee and inserted research subjects. I think some of these ideas and the opportunities that we need to provide for people with disability can be reflected with this if people would like to take some of the resources back with them. And if you could go back 2 slides, Margaret. I hope that you will try to remember these big key messages. Ask, don't assume. Disability does not change the individual, and try to see the person in front of you as an individual with unique needs and common rights. And I want you to know that no research participant morale was destroyed in the preparation of this talk. And we hope that after this talk, when the smoke clears from some of our discussions today, that you will perceive people with disability and their participation in research differently. Thank you, and we can open up for questions now. Azadeh, can you read and see if anybody on the line has questions or issues they'd like to share or discuss?
Sure. Kathy, Lubna, and Randy, thank you so much for the great presentation. And as I was just listening to that and reflecting on those myths I was thinking of how much of that I have in myself, or thinking of those myths as you're presenting that, even some of them unconsciously. And you really, really nicely approach that at the very end, that these are the myths and the stereotypes of we may have about the people with visible disabilities, and how much of that applies to those with invisible disabilities. So very strong presentation. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing of those. And I could connect to a lot of those, like when you were talking about your kids, looking at that holding the wheelchair is as a way as if they're holding your hand. And it just gave me goosebumps thinking of those. Thanks for giving all those examples. I thank you so much for all the audience for being so patient with us. So now we're open to the questions. If anyone has any question, you can put them into the chat box or into the Q&A. No, we don't have the Q&A.
Yeah, I think I really like the ask, don't assume part of it, because when people see me and they see me as a woman, they never assume that I want to be a man. As a person who's from South Asian heritage, they don't assume I automatically want to be Caucasian, but when they see me as a person with a disability, they automatically assume that I want to be an able-bodied person. And I mean, come on, we are able to accept ourselves for who we are, thankfully, with time and with patience. So just make sure that come to us, talk to us.
There's one other thing that I wanted to add as well that I forgot when we were talking about the myth that people with physical disabilities automatically have cognitive disabilities, people that question your value and your capabilities in general. Was we talked about this during our meeting, was tokenism, where there just seems to be this perception that because I was in my master's degree program, people thought, largely, or not largely, this was something we talked about because we realized that the myth is largely there, that, I was there to fill a token spot. It's like, oh, look at us. We accepted someone to our program who's in a wheelchair. So they're meeting some kind of quota, or same with job equity, that you're there because of job equity, not because of what you are capable of doing and the work that you do. I think that, again, is another prevalent myth that people have. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to say it. I'm glad there you go, took this opportunity to do it.
Thanks, Randy, for calling it as it is. We appreciate that, and for sharing. Are there any questions there as a day in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat, and I was going to actually acknowledge what Randy mentioned, because that's a very important concern, that in terms of how the people with disability or with other marginalized population, when we look at the equity and diversity and inclusion, look into that when they're being hired in a position, and if it is because of their capacities and a strong research or talent for that work, or just because of the try to increase the diversity. And that's quite a challenge to address. And the other part is that, I mean, if you want Randy to address or comment on that whether in that position, sometimes the people may feel that they are now the point of the showcasing of that in that institute, because now they are the person who is marginalized in that institute. And how much of that really, first of all, makes it add to the mental burden that, okay, now I have to be really good, because otherwise I will always be seen as I'm not the right person for that, even if it is not true.
Right.
Or they want to always just have me at the front. And whether you had any experience or any feeling of that negative aspects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there is, I worked for a bit. I got away from social work for a bit and worked at Home Depot. So I was a sales associate at Home Depot. And that's where I heard the buzz about, oh, you got hired on as a token person more than anywhere else, because the job was very physically demanding. And automatically people thought because I'm in a chair, I can't do those physical things. And so I really caught myself many times stretching myself and going beyond and feeling like I had to prove to people that I was there because I'm capable of doing it. Like, I mean, taking a big stack of lumber and loading it onto a trolley. And in my mind, it's like, see, I'm going to show these people I am physically capable of doing this. You know, was it the smartest thing for me to do? Probably not. I probably could have hurt myself pretty bad. But at the same time, I was like, no, I'm going to prove to you that I've got the ability to do it. So I really felt a strong sense at that job that I was, and even with customers. I mean, I had customers come up to me. I mean, I'm wearing a bright orange apron, and I'd have people come up to me and say, "Do you work here?" And I remember one of my favorite comebacks was I would just say, "No, the orange makes my eyes pop." So and so I felt I was always having to prove myself to customers and prove myself to other people. And at one point, I was given the opportunity to be a departmental manager. And at that point, because I had friends in the store that told me, you know, a lot of people think the only reason why you got offered that position was because you're in a chair, and that our manager was doing it because it looks good for her. And I'm like, what can I do to prove to people that I can do the job just as well as anybody else who's up walking? You know, can I get things off the top shelf? No, but I can ask for people to do that, and then I'll excel at something else. Like that was my biggest challenge working at that job, was perceptions of my abilities.
Yeah.
And it is quite hard to deal with, and then to try to change that. And I hope that as we move forward, we could work on that and how to change one of the myths that applies to anyone with who is part of the disadvantaged or marginalized population.
Yeah.
Kathy, I had a question for you, and then also
Sure.
if Lubna and Randy have comment on that. And that comes to having role models and mentors to look into when we're talking about the youth, about the students, about the early career researchers, or anyone in the society who have a disability. And we hear a lot about the lack of role models for the people in terms of to see themselves in all these different potentials, that there is no limit to have kids. There's no limit to be the best in what you're doing, or to be a scientist or researcher or any other activity, even if the activity, as what Randy suggested, requires physical capabilities. So what do you think, or what are the challenges, and what should we do in terms of the role models and mentorship for the others with disability?
I think one of the things that Toronto Rehab has been doing, which is having students with disability in our environment, is a really important step. And I think talking about it, in my experience, I am humbled every day by the resilience of people with disability who develop other, what I would call, extreme abilities, and who are wonderful role models for change, for resilience, for innovation. So I think part of it is helping to share the stories, and I think there are a number of people who are doing that. And I think having rounds or things like this is a way to get started, and maybe having some journal clubs or other things would be another way to do it. And I think having people who have been successful talk about how they got there. Almost everybody who's been successful has had adversity and found a way through. The strategies are often different for different people, but many people have had their own adversity and had to plan for success. Not sure that I've really answered your very complex question, but I think starting to talk about the issues and normalize them is a very important first.
That was great, Kathy. How about Lubna? It seems that you
Yeah.
have some comments.
So I definitely want to speak to you from the point of the fact that I work at the peer program at Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. So if you are an individual who has a spinal cord injury and you want to have a discussion with others who, want to explore anything from parenthood, going back to school, getting into a job, driving an accessible vehicle, or anything from activities of daily living to more complex needs as your life evolves, we are able to match you with a mentor. We have a very dedicated program where we have mentors who do volunteer their time, and they can help you set yourself up for success.
Yeah, and I would say yes, because I was thinking that same thing. Peer support programs are a fantastic way of doing that. I mean, my heroes are other people in chairs and things that I have seen people accomplish that I don't think I'd have the strength to do. So it's a very important issue, and it's just, I think, more just the dissemination of information and getting examples out there. I think the media does a very poor job at celebrating anything. I think the news should be called the bad news. But I mean, if we could, just get even mainstream media and stuff to support and to highlight stuff like that, I think it would go a long way to inspire everybody, regardless of whether or not you're in a chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any question from the audience? So I have one more question, and that is in my role as like a scientist. And there are times that I'm looking, because I like to increase diversity in my team in different aspects. And one of the areas that I look to is to have students from different backgrounds. So are there networks or resources that, for example, if I'm looking for a postdoc or for a PhD student with a disability or with from a more diverse background, that I can look into and then try to find the students? For example, I know that the Black students have a network, the Indigenous students have a network. Is there something similar to that?
Luca, what do you think?
I'm not aware of any. I am aware that there's a number of consortiums of people with lived experience that people can tap into. Like, for instance, the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium would be an example, that, or some of the things like the Ontario Alliance that have a number of partner organizations that may have regular health professionals or trainees have people with disability, but I don't think there is an identified network. And
the universities, though, the universities may have, students with a disability, I don't know, groups that, that help them with peer mentorship within the university campuses and stuff like that. That would be a good place to start. That's where I would look if I were you.
Thank you.
I've looked into, if I may, it's Bryce Donald from Kingston. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, thanks. I have looked into the universities like the accessibility services, and I believe some of those programs do have a peer support, others don't. So hopefully others take note and do create one, but there are some. I believe the University of Toronto does have one. I'm not 100% sure.
You're right, there is one associated with the Disability Studies Office.
Right.
But people only sort of come across it if they are part of, using the disability services. So it's a good point. There aren't very many. So right. There you go, Dave.
Yeah, I actually did participate in an evening that the University of Toronto had done for mentoring students into careers after as individuals with disabilities looking for jobs. I know University of Toronto has one, and I also have an ex-coworker who works at George Brown University who does have a dedicated office for its students who have a disability, and how to ensure career successes for them. So those are the places where I would recommend you look.
Thank you so much.
As a day, I'd like to thank Lubna and Randy for sharing their personal stories and being a voice for others in the community, and take a moment to celebrate all of their abilities. So thank you both for your time, energy, and enthusiasm.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Kathy, for thinking of us.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we can bring this to a close today. I have another appointment I need to attend in about 4 minutes. But I thank you to the people on the line for persevering with us. I know it's been wasn't a bit of a rocky start, but I hope that Randy and Lubna were worth the wait.
It's all good.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right. Thank you, everyone.